Welcome to the Naked Soul podcast, where we dissolve the barriers between spirituality and the human experience.
Here, we embrace the full spectrum of your journey, celebrating the highs and the lows, the glimmers and the triggers.
Our mission is to dive deep into the candid conversations that everyone thinks about but few talk about, breaking the silence and removing the stigma around the complexities of being human.
Whether you're on a healing journey, an entrepreneurial path, or anywhere in between.
If you're ready to shatter the notions of spirituality being all love and light and embrace radical honesty and acceptance of your soul's journey here, let's strip away the layers and let's get naked.
Welcome everybody to our first episode of the Naked Soul podcast, where today I'm just going to be telling you a little bit about ourselves, how we got to where we are, and kind of the journey that led us to be starting this podcast today. So I want to introduce you to Shawna Thibodeau first. And tell me what you do and how you got here.
All right. So I am a meditation teacher, a spiritual mentor, and a business mentor as well. So I help people with a few different things. So the first thing is really healing things from our past that might still be affecting us today. So things like thought patterns, emotions, belief systems, and all of this we store within. So I help clients start to get aware of these things and then help to heal and release them. So that is done often through the top modalities that I use are meditation, breath work, inner child work using the internal family systems model by Richard Schwartz, as well as things like co-creation as well and manifestation. So those are kind of the top modalities that I use. The second thing I help clients with is getting in touch with their inner truths. So that's usually a byproduct of using the modalities that I mentioned. Connecting to our inner truths is a byproduct of those things. So when you do things like meditation, breath work, journaling, reflection, you can start to identify like what part of me is conditioned from the past and from society, and what are actually my inner truths. So I help clients get in touch with that. The third thing is really creating a new reality based on what we're thinking, feeling, where we want to go. So using intention and things like co-creation. And what I have found is that the thought patterns, the belief systems, the emotions that we're sitting in each day have a humongous effect. Effect on the reality that we are creating. So really helping clients to shed what isn't serving them and step into belief systems, thought patterns, ways of thinking and feeling that actually align with what they truly desire and what is authentic to them. And then the last thing is I help holistic wellness spiritual entrepreneurs build their businesses from scratch or help to grow and improve already existing businesses. And that came about from the last 10 years, growing my own business quite successfully and moving from leaving nursing and moving full-time into entrepreneurship. So I help those people with a combination of that mindset and healing work combined with strategies that have really helped me to help their businesses grow.
So, I mean, you mentioning that you were in nursing for so many years, like how did the transition from nursing into this work come about?
Yeah, so we will go back to when I was first really struggling with depression and anxiety. So that's really where all of my work stems from. I started struggling when I was 13 years old, really noticing I was experiencing depression and anxiety and just masking it as I got into my teenage years, just trying.
What were the signs for you? Because I think a lot of people, especially like that young, just think it's normal. So like what did you feel that you were like, I think that this is depression?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I noticed or I didn't have the awareness probably around like 13, 14, probably around 15 was when I just felt down and everything just felt non-exciting, I would say. Is like I just felt a numbness, sad. I was having unsafe thoughts pretty early in age. Yeah, and I think just not feeling excited about life.
Yeah, which is such a
Anxiety.
young age. You
Yeah, at
should
such
be.
a young age. And then anxiety as well, where I noticed that fearful thoughts were keeping me from doing things, putting myself in different places. I was like anxious to go into certain situations. So that's when I started to notice that anxiety was playing a role in how I was actually showing up.
Yeah.
So those were probably the first, like the main signs when I was younger.
And would you say that it was that experience that brought you into nursing?
Definitely contributed because I struggled, my family tree on both sides have struggled with depression, anxiety, and substance
Oh,
abuse.
wow.
Yeah. So I think seeing myself struggle, seeing family members struggle, that really interested me into mental health. And so I was in school at first for kinesiology. And then, like a lot of people feel, what am I going to do with this? I kind of just picked it, right? So I
Yeah,
picked it.
like
Yeah.
you have to choose something to
You have to choose
do.
something. Yeah. So I chose kinesiology first, but then depression, I was experiencing it even more, and I think that played into it too, where I was like, I know I'm going to school for this thing, but like I'm not excited about it. Other people were in the program in kinesiology, they were going into physiotherapy, sports therapy. Those were kind of the top careers coming out of that. And I didn't feel excited about any of those. Yeah. So I just looked at those people. I was like, that's cool that you guys are so excited, but like, I'm not at all. So that's when I went to a career counselor at McMaster, because I was at McMaster for kinesiology. And then they recommended, actually, we spoke about like what courses I was actually interested in. And they were like, have you ever considered nursing? Because what I did like at the time was like health courses and like nutrition. And I loved learning anatomy and things about the body. So I was like, okay, nursing seems, I can get a bit more excited about nursing. It feels a bit more aligned. And then once I was in nursing, and because of my history, because of family history, that's when I started getting interested in mental health nursing.
Right.
But unfortunately, at the same time, my depression worsened. So I was in nursing school. I was going to get this degree. I still didn't, the depression was overpowering any excitement for the future. I was also experiencing extreme anxiety, social anxiety, performance anxiety at my nursing placements. So I would have to go to the bathroom and I would almost be on the verge of vomiting from anxiety.
God. As you're saying this, I'm thinking about like how ironic almost it is that like for people going through for mental health nursing, there wasn't any like mental health support for you.
Yeah. Technically, at that point, I wasn't specializing in mental health yet. But it's just ironic in general that those kinds of supports,
don't exist.
Yeah. And I had a moment with a preceptor who pulled me aside and asked, do you even want to be here? It doesn't seem like you want to be here, but it was because of crippling anxiety that I was struggling with. And I was like, I do want to be here. And she's like, because you just seem like you don't want to be here. But really, it was like a lot of struggle on the inside. So that, again, just shows that we never really know what's going on with a person. They could just seem like they're disengaged, but inside they could actually be like really battling humongous things.
It's like that resting bee face.
That's
right?
basically what she was indicating to me. She's like, you don't want to be here. You have a resting bee face. But probably inside, I was like, just so anxious about everything. And so it was around that time that I really decided I needed to do something about my mental health, because everything was just feeling dark and I also had this moment where I thought, okay, if this is originating in the mind, I wonder if working with the mind can actually do anything to help it. So I remember having that thought, and I started with counseling. So I just went to the campus counselor, but that I didn't have a good first experience. It just felt like she was asking me to lay everything out, but then not giving me any helpful tools.
Yeah.
So I was like, this doesn't feel super helpful. But I was in the waiting room to book my next appointment, and I saw a little card on the side, and it was actually for a psychologist that worked downtown. And his card had a pretty little tree on it, and I've always resonated with trees.
Branding is so important.
Seriously, there's a tree on my arm. So I resonated with trees for some reason. And there was a quote on the card too that really resonated with me. And I picked it up and I brought it home. I put it in my pocket and I brought it home and didn't even know if I was going to do anything with it. When I was sitting at that night, I remembered that card was in my pocket. So I pulled it out. I looked up his website, and he had a lot of spiritual quotes on there. And I wasn't spiritual, didn't grow up with spirituality, didn't grow up with religion.
Oh, interesting.
So all of this was like new language to me, but something when I read it resonated with me. And I was like feeling a draw, which we'll talk about a lot on the podcast.
I think that's something that a lot of people can understand but can't really be put into words, is it's just like this feeling.
Exactly.
And like it makes no sense, but you're like, for some reason I need to follow this.
Yeah. So felt that feeling. So glad. Oh my God. So glad I followed the nudge within. So I looked up his website, and his counseling was quite expensive because he was a psychotherapist. But I was like, you know what? This is worth it. I'm feeling drawn to it. Let's just go. And I sat across from him during our first appointment, and he recommended that I join his 8-week MBSR program, which stands for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction.
Okay.
And it is a meditation-based program created by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who really brought meditation from the East to the West into medical centers. So that's what he's really known for. And didn't know what meditation was. I asked him, like, what's meditation? And he said, well, we get quiet, we follow the breath. And I'm thinking, how does that help anything with what I'm going through, you know? But again, something drew me to it. And I said, okay, let's just commit to this. Let's commit to this 8-week program. It was 3 hours a night, once a week. So that's,
oh my God.
Yeah. So it was like a commitment.
Yeah, that's not a small commitment, especially when you're like, I have no idea what this meditation stuff is.
Exactly. So it's actually ironic that I was like, yeah, let's do this. And each week went to the class, and yeah, slowly I just started. I remember when I first started, I'm like, what is this meditation? Like, what are we doing here? But slowly I started to grasp what he was saying in class. And basically he was getting us to distinguish between, like, when we are focusing on a point of focus in meditation, so say the breath, and then he would get us to notice the commentary that wasn't that. You know, you're better able to notice the commentary when you're trying to focus on something. And then we look at that commentary, like, what are the patterns of it? How is it causing you suffering? So that was the first time that I was able to kind of separate and be like, whoa, my thought patterns are causing a lot of suffering. And then by also focusing on one point of focus, you're bringing your brain waves from like high beta brain waves into lower alpha brain waves. You're experiencing this kind of calm that I've never experienced before. So that was what I noticed week after week, was I was starting to access this place of peace that I had never accessed before.
Yeah.
And then I was better able to start catching the commentary and looking at it and seeing how it was causing me so much suffering.
So interesting how we know no different until we experience something that's different, and you're like, oh, I am suffering, or I am anxious, or like, you don't have to feel this way all the time.
Yeah, which makes me also think, like, it's so hard to notice our thought patterns that we're stuck in until you experience some distance from them.
Yeah. I always use the analogy because I never thought that I was like gluten intolerant, but because I was eating gluten every day.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, like let's experiment and like cut gluten out for like a month and just see what happens. And so much inflammation left my body.
Yeah.
So I always use that analogy with people because it's just, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And that's so important. And I think we'll do episodes on this for sure, is like, you have to try something different in order to experience
something different.
And it's actually ironic the amount that we don't do that. We just stay stuck in like the problem and we're like, why am I feeling this way? But we're not doing enough differently to truly notice what's wrong, or like and something different to be like, oh. Yeah.
Simple in theory, difficult in practice.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so fell in love with meditation during that 8-week program. And then after the 8 weeks, he had weekly classes that you could go to if you were like an alumni of the course. And we would basically read a different excerpt from a spiritual text or a spiritual book, and we would discuss it, and then we would practice meditation. And that was literally my favorite class ever. Like, so much fun. I fell in love with these classes, and I fell in love with all the books we were reading, like Eckhart Tolle, Marianne Williamson, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and I started to, that really opened up the door to spiritual authors for me, where I just dove in and I started to understand like life from a more spiritual lens, which was really neat.
But you still went through with mental health nursing.
So still went through, finished nursing, was able to finish nursing with this skill of meditation. And then in mental health nursing, I started to do my placements at specific areas. And I learned more about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And I got to actually sit in with group therapy work. And it was a really neat combination of practicing therapy in groups as like a trainee, and then also doing my own practice with meditation and spiritual reading. And this kind of created a really powerful combination for myself of improving my own mental health. And then that ignited so then I went into mental health nursing, but quickly, for my placements, I was an outpatient, which gave me the opportunity to work with groups. I started my career.
What does outpatient mean?
Outpatient basically means they're not in hospital.
Okay.
Clients. So they maybe were in hospital, but now they're coming to the outpatient clinic for like weekly group therapy or something. So probably in a less acute state of their mental health condition. So I went from being in that environment to then going back to inpatient, where conditions are a little bit more, they're in the heightened like activation of it, more challenging symptoms. And my role then shifted again back to more floor-based nursing, which is a lot of giving medications and monitoring the floor and doing assessments and discharges. And I felt again a draw kind of, or a shifting away from feeling as aligned again. And then in my own meditation practice, then I started getting these ideas of starting up my own business. And at first I was like, whoa, like we just started nursing. This was my first year of working as a nurse full time. So I'd finally like made it, right? Like I'm made it. I'm in my career now. Yay. And then year one, I'm having these ideas of like building a business. And there were so many limiting beliefs and different voices from the outside as to like, why would you do that when you just entered your career? But in meditation, and this again is showing how you can access inner truth through meditation, because all these ideas were coming up through meditation. Basically they wouldn't go away. They wouldn't go away. That's the
you can try to ignore it.
Yeah, you could try to ignore the truth, but they'll keep knocking at your door. So basically I was like, okay, I think I need to start following this. And the first step was to get trained as a meditation teacher. So I found a training program and loved that training program as well. So again, I always felt most aligned when I was like involved in these communities and doing my practice. And after got trained in meditation, then I started teaching community classes in Niagara, and that was back in 2014.
Okay.
Again, had to work through a ton of my own limiting beliefs, worked through my anxiety, my performance anxiety, social anxiety. And that was a huge accomplishment, to not listen to those voices, the voices of the ego mind, and really follow my inner truths and just put myself out there and start somewhere, right?
We all have to start
We all have to start somewhere, yeah. I had a period where I went a little bit off track because I started dating someone in the States. And that basically, it was a period of thinking that you can do it all, and you can, some parts of your life could be misaligned, but you can still stay aligned in this area. That was a humongous learning lesson that if you are misaligned in one area of your life, it's going to affect other areas of your life. Because basically, when I was dating this person, I was not able to handle working pretty much full time, running a business, as well as dating this person across border and like being social on weekends, drinking too much, etc. And it was just creating, there was a part of me that like wanted to die, but I was still like keeping it alive. And I was just trying to like live almost all these
in
different
in two worlds.
So that ended that relationship, but that was actually quite heartbreaking for me. And at the same time, my brother was struggling with his addiction. And basically, I had to stop my meditation classes and stop. I had actually started coaching people at that time as well. I had to stop the practice, and I actually moved away to Toronto to distance myself from this relationship and to be closer to home as things were happening at home. So I moved to Toronto. When I was in Toronto, that's when my brother's addiction intensified, and then he passed away from an accidental drug overdose.
And this was in 2014?
No, sorry, this is 2018 now.
2018 now.
So we're up to 2018, and that experience deepened my spiritual relationship so much, because basically I found I could not meditate in my typical way. I would, after he passed away, I would try to meditate and I just could not focus. So basically what I started doing, I just laid on the ground and I just ended up praying, but I didn't know I was praying. And I just said, please send me healing. Please send me healing. And I was doing this one visual of visualizing healing golden light coming in through the top of my head and filling up my body. And those were the two things that I just did every single day after he passed away, probably for 3 months. Please send me healing and this golden healing light. And what I found was, after around 3 months of doing this, or less even, of maybe 2 months, things started to happen in my life that it felt like that prayer was getting answered. It literally felt like this is where I started to believe in a higher power and the intelligence of the universe, and that when we communicate to the universe, it can actually communicate back. Because what I found, it felt like the universe was like, oh, you want healing? Go to this, try this teacher. And it all happened in very like synchronistic and like funny ways that you'd be like, this seems weird.
Yeah,
you know?
I think we should like talk about that for a second, because so often people think that like asking for healing is just like your pain's going to be taken away, or like you're not going to be sad anymore, when really it is like the way that God, universe, higher power communicates with us is like giving us these little breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
And like,
exactly,
you have to actually like take that step,
do the thing
to then get the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So I had to actually, then I had to go.
Yeah, then you had to go.
Yeah, I had to go to the class. And it was a women's circle that I found, which was very lovely. And actually, it's funny, this is another great point, is that I was actually really triggered by the women's circle at first, because the leader was very, like, I was in a grief, depression, dark night of the soul phase. The leader was like this. She had so much energy, and I found it very triggering to be around the energy. but something, again, that inner nudge was saying like, keep going, keep going in these circles. And then she posted a retreat that she was having in Costa Rica. And I signed up, even though I had this big aversion to her and her energy and just everything. But something within was like, you need to go.
And like you
retreat.
Want to be in that energy.
Yeah, exactly. So I went on 2 retreats that year. One was down at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck. And that was when I had a really synchronistic moment with a random girl that wasn't even on my retreat. She was on a different retreat, but she basically mentioned I should look into law of attraction, but in like a very just weird way. Like, and I think I've told you the story where she was like, you need to look into law of attraction. And then we stopped. We were like eating lunch and conversation continued. And then I got up to leave and she's like, hey, you need to look into law of attraction and manifestation. Didn't know this girl. And I'm like, that was such a weird encounter. But the encounter didn't leave my mind. So on the way home, I just started downloading and listening to like Wayne Dyer. And that's when I found Joe Dispenza. And I had a 6-hour drive home. So I just consumed. I just hit play on like anyone who was talking about it. And to be honest, I thought it was all a bit nuts at first. Like, I was like, okay, is this the way that the world could actually work? Like, you visualize something and you can shift reality. But I listened to enough podcasts, because I had 6 hours, that enough people were talking about it that I was like, okay, like there has to be something here, you know? So I got home and I decided that I would spend 3 months. This is what we call the 3-month experiment.
Yeah,
the 3-month experiment. I said, you're going to try this for 3 months without judgment. And you're just going to see, like, you're going to assess the practice after 3 months. You can't assess it before then. And you're just going to see how it works in your life. So I hadn't gone on the Costa Rica retreat yet, but I started practicing manifestation every single day before going on the retreat. At that time, I was just manifesting healing and stepping back into greater inner strength and an improved mood, greater peace, greater confidence, things like that. And then I went on to the Costa Rica retreat and just had such healing experiences on that retreat. And I also looked at the leaders on the retreat and I was like, and seeing the work that they were doing in group. So it was bringing me back to an experience of that group work. And I was like, this is what I want to do. It was just like a knowing.
And were you still nursing when you went on this retreat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So full-time nursing. I didn't get any time off after my brother passed away. I went to a walk-in and the doctor basically was like, you can have a day off.
Oh my God.
So I basically pushed all that down and was like, we're going to keep going. We have to keep going. So I was working with people struggling with addiction like 4 days probably after my brother passed away. And I would have to take breaks in the bathroom to cry. And yeah, I had to like walk away from clients or patients sometimes because it was too challenging. And it felt very, it was unfortunate, you know?
And I think so many people experience that where it's just like work is the most important thing. You just have to put your head down and like plow through it and like cry when you get home, sleep when you die.
Yeah, we don't honor grief in our society at all.
No.
Like other societies, it's a norm to almost like take the year off and go into like healing. Like, so I was still full-time nursing and came back from the retreat and my manifestation practice really shifted. Or not really shifted, but just I added things in because I now had clarity as to what else I desired. And I knew that I really desired to move out of nursing full-time and into entrepreneurship full-time. I knew that that was a deep desire of mine. I also felt like doing healing work, the meditation work I had been teaching before. After Greg passed away, I asked myself, like, how am I most useful in this life? You know? And it really became clear to me that I could actually help people a lot more if I was helping in the way that I wanted to help in, and that was authentic to me. And that would actually like serve or be like the greatest gift I could give myself, the world, and him, you know?
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So that I got clarity on that from going on the retreat. And I also knew that to keep the magic alive that I felt on retreat, I had to shift something. This goes back to what we were saying. You have to do things differently. I knew that in order to keep the retreat magic alive, I had to show up to practices every single day. Otherwise, you're just gonna, you resort back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started a powerful morning routine of manifestation and oracle cards at the time. That was really part of my practice for a while. And it was just this fun morning routine, but powerful, I realized, because this morning routine honestly shifted things like so rapidly for me after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because everything kind of exploded for you.
Everything exploded in 2019, 2020, which is ironic because the pandemic happened, but my business was actually exploding during that time, which goes to show, it goes to show the power of the mind and the belief systems that we fall into. Because so many people were telling me like, oh, your business, like, it's not gonna, like, we're going through the pandemic now. But I chose to ignore all of that. I kept up with my morning routine and my co-creation practices and belief systems work religiously through that period. And my whole external world was shifting at a very rapid rate. So yeah, I started running retreats that year. I came back and started running women's circles that year, retreats that year. And then I built my very first online program that year, combining the practices that had helped me so much. And with those three things, everything just started to boom from there.
Because I remember when I met you in 2022 was when you were just announcing your first Italy retreat.
International retreat.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was like, how did you get here?
There you go. That's the story. Yeah. So I think at this point, it's been like over 50 retreats that I've led. And then it's brought me to different countries as well. At this point, Italy, Portugal, Costa Rica, we'll be going to Peru. And then from there, I also grew 2 more online programs. So 5 weeks of manifestation. And then it was around probably 2021 where people saw the success of my business and they started asking as well, how have you done this? And I was getting it a lot from yoga teachers, different spiritual entrepreneurs. So then that gave me the nudge, people want to learn about this, which I shifted into my business coaching program.
Now known as the Abundant Soul.
Yeah.
And I think that it's honestly like such a humbling thing to teach other people how to do this. Like for me, that feels like the ultimate growth in like just an abundant mentality. Like you see how many people need this work and like how powerful this work is, and like we can't do it on our own. Like there are not enough people out there to offer services to help people heal. And I'm sure like you can make that connection going back to mental health nursing and being like, if people had access to like coming on these retreats or doing these mindfulness programs, how much less suffering would we see in like the hospitals and mental health nursing?
Yeah, definitely. I know a limiting belief that a lot of people who want to move into healing work have is that it's oversaturated, but it's not oversaturated at all. Like, how could we even say that bringing healing work into the world, like, it's oversaturated? We want healing work.
There's billions of people on this planet, like, and the majority of them are suffering.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely a limiting belief to think that it's oversaturated and that you don't have your own unique way of working with people. I also always say to people, like, the odds of someone being free when this practitioner is running something, like, there needs to be so many more options because
It's true.
Yeah,
so many people want to join retreats and it's just like this particular date that doesn't work, or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the project I'm currently working on is the book.
Yeah.
So putting
Tell us
all
about
of
it.
this story into a nice memoir for people to, really look at the healing journey and the journey of coming into a life that's more aligned with your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when can we potentially expect said book?
Yes. So it will either be the end of 2024 or the beginning months of 2025. And that has been a huge, the idea came into my head on a hike on that Costa Rica retreat. So in November of this year, that will be 6 years ago. So that just goes to show that's been in my head for 6 years. I've been writing it for 6 years. It's also been part of my co-creation practice for 6 years. So sometimes it just shows that some things quicker, whereas others take longer to come into reality. But the faith, like, if it's within you, if it's this idea that just keeps knocking, which is like this book, it just kept knocking.
Yeah.
It's like you got to listen to the inner voice, and it's taken longer to bring into reality. It's taken more trust. It's taken more like persistence.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm getting this like thought of like, who was the first woman to get pregnant and have no idea how long it was going to take to birth that child?
That's a hilarious thought. That's awesome.
But
That's
it's
so
like
true.
It's true. For a long time we didn't actually like measure like months and days the way that we do now in percentile. So it's just like one day you stop getting your cycle, your belly starts growing, and you're like, I don't know how far along I am. I don't know how many more months
Oh my gosh, it's
I
so
have
true.
to, and you're just trusting your body.
That's actually so profound, because if more of us could treat our ideas like that, or the projects that we're working on, as like, I don't know how long.
But I'm going to take care of myself, and I'm going to nourish myself and trust that like the birth is going to
it's coming.
come.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is my story.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. And we can move to yours now.
Does this mean it's my turn?
Yeah. So what do you do? What do you help people with?
Yeah. So I'm a medium, I'm a spiritual teacher and intuitive coach as well. I bring a lot of the mediumship and channeling and intuition work into my sessions with clients. A lot of people similar to you are facing like really big blocks and limiting beliefs in their life. A lot of it rooted in childhood trauma as young as like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And they don't consciously remember what some of those traumas were. And I think just to touch on briefly, because I know so many of my clients, and I mean, even people that we've worked with together are like, no, I had a great childhood, or like, there was no trauma. Like, trauma, we can say that there's like capital T or lowercase t, but it's an unprocessed emotion.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have all experienced some level of conflict with our parents, our siblings.
Yeah, conflict, tension, stress.
Yeah, children on the schoolyard that was left unresolved, and we internalize that as being a reflection of us and our worth.
I think that needs to be like talked about more, in terms of exactly how you said it, is like, these things that are affecting us today can be, it's just an unprocessed emotion. So, because I think what you're saying, or like what's happening in the world, is exactly what you were saying, where people are looking back and being like, no, I didn't have like any, like, I can't remember anything. I can't. And I feel like that's a little bit of the lingo that's happening, or has been happening for many years. And I feel like it needs to shift into like, maybe it comes with taking the word trauma right out of it, right? Where it's like,
I feel like especially a lot of millennials grew up with parents who were like, I turned out fine. And it's like, is that what we want the standard to be?
Right.
Like, do we want the standard to be fine?
Fine.
Right?
Yeah.
So they were raised thinking, and like by no fault of their own, but they were raised thinking that like this is normal.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you have more than we had. And then they kind of passed that down to us. And we're like, you're doing better than I did. Like, how many? I mean, for those of you who don't know, we're in Niagara region of Ontario, Canada. So we get some bad weather here. And I think a lot of children of parents who grew up here got told this story of like, we used to have to walk like miles up the hill both way in the snow.
Yeah.
You know, so the underlying message for so many of us was basically like, stuff it down, you shouldn't be upset, don't feel your emotions.
Yeah.
And so many people reach this point in their life similar to like the story that you told of just like, I can't keep it down anymore. Like I can't hide it anymore, and they don't even know why they're unhappy.
Yeah.
So that's where my work comes in, and through my ability to channel what I call God, divine consciousness, the universe, whatever name you want to put to it, we're able to actually tell them what some of the traumas were and things that happened in their childhood. And just like you said, like it's a feeling that you get that like it resonates with them and it just feels true. And a lot of times after bringing these things to the surface, they're like, oh yeah, this thing happened when I was a kid, and they can remember it. So it's like, it's kind of stuck back here in the subconscious. And by channeling the guidance, it like loosens it and brings it up into their conscious mind so that we can actually work with those emotions and feel them and release them and heal them. So I've been working with clients one-on-one since 2021. And this is the work that we do. It looks really different for everybody because everybody has had different experiences, but I'm moving more into group work because I'm recognizing the power of us all coming together and actually recognizing that we're not so different.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And just like you said, like this teacher was like, you have a resting bee face, and really you're like struggling with like crippling anxiety. There's so many people who feel that way. And for them to know that they're not alone is such a powerful part of the healing journey as well. So my path is still evolving, just as yours is. I used to teach mediumship courses. That's kind of on hold for now, where helping people tune into their intuition and come back to their soul self is really happening through the power of retreats now. So I also host retreats. We host retreats together. And that's where a lot of this like coming back to yourself and learning to trust your intuition is coming from in my work currently, which is really, really my goal at the end of the day, is to help people come back to themselves and remembering and reclaiming their own power.
Yeah.
Because we live in this society that is programmed to make us believe that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And even within, and I know that this will be like an episode of itself one day, but even within like the spiritual wellness, personal development space, there's become this like underlying tone of like, you're broken and you need to fix yourself. And we externalize our power to like all these other people, thinking that they can like fix us and that they know more than us. And we have everything that we need within us. And so I'm trying to bring people back to that truth. Yeah.
And really like shedding what isn't them, you know, like healing the things that are not them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a tough pill to swallow to realize that like none of this is me.
Right.
Like none of these thought patterns that you speak of are me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everything that we like, the majority of things we think are programmed, and they're coming from externally, right?
Yeah.
And we don't even realize it.
Yeah. Because on top of like our mother and our father and our grandparents, like the schooling system and the messages that are taught to us there are pretty antiquated. The proverbial they, the moment that you're born as either like a woman or a man, there is a pressure and a message that's being delivered to you. And we're so unaware of the fact that these things are ruling our lives.
Exactly.
And that it's not us. Like, it's not us at all.
I have shivers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what got you onto your own path?
Oh my gosh.
What was the journey there?
It's, there's so many similarities, but so many differences in our stories as well. Because I know you didn't grow up, like you said, with a relationship with like God or a higher power. But for me, I did. My mom was very spiritual. And she had dreams that would like happen, like eerily happen. And she always was really like in tune with herself. So from a very young age, I wanted to be a medium.
So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was so interesting, but I also believed that it was something that you just have or you don't have. So I looked to all these people and I was just like, oh, like they have the gift and I don't have the gift, which I now understand that like this comes from our soul. We all have a soul. We can all tap into this divine guidance and intuition. But my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis as young as when I was like 4 years old. So my entire life, I witnessed her trying to heal herself in her illness. And she took a lot of kind of like traditional Chinese medicine approaches to that. So as the story goes, her doctor, once she was diagnosed, was like, you can take this medicine. It's kind of all we can offer. There's no cure for this. Your brain is shriveling as we speak. In less than 10 years, you'll be in a wheelchair. And one day, I guess she woke up and she was like, fuck that.
Good for her.
Yeah. And her doctor refused to see her again because she refused the medicine. And she was just like, I'm going to find something else. So
I think that's like a place, going back to like all of our stories as well, I feel like that's a crucial place and time when you start to say like, fuck this, like screw it, like I am tired of living this way, believing this idea.
And giving my power away.
Giving my power
away.
It's
that same thing of like, oh, well, a doctor said that it's going to be this way. So I'm going to give my power to them. And she was like, no, I'm not. Like, you don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. Which was such a blessing for me to witness that. So yeah, she was working with this guy, like from a very young age. I was exposed to weird stuff. Like we were like juicing funny things and she was making like corn silk tea and eating chayote and doing qigong and like going for like oxygen therapy. And although she did have like episodes, which mostly were triggered by like stress and like seasonal changes, she never experienced really any of the symptoms that they told her that she was going to. Which was like incredible. She was always able to keep her license. She did have to stop working, but I got to spend all of this time with my mother when I was young and growing up. But because there was this, kind of focus on her and her suffering and what she was going through, there just wasn't a lot left for the children. And I don't blame my parents. But there was always, and I denied it for like my whole life, but there was always this fear that I was going to lose my mother. And there was always this pressure on me to like be good and be quiet and manage my emotions because I didn't want to stress her out and make her sick. So of course, all of this is happening in the mind of like a 5, 6, 7-year-old girl who doesn't actually understand it. And I started to hit depression pretty young as well. I was like 12 years old the summer before I got into grade 7 that I developed eating disorders. And then I went back to school, and all of a sudden I had friends, and that kind of reaffirmed that now there's a pressure on the way that I look. So I had an extreme pressure to like behave a certain way and to look a certain way. And there was a lot of external factors that were kind of validating that this was the way that I needed to be. And I just lived my life in fear of disappointing everybody. So then you reach high school, and there's peer pressure, and there's boys. And I was seeking a lot of attention through alcohol and men. Which,
Same.
Yeah, which got me into some pretty precarious situations. And I recognize now that I was just acting out and looking for attention and trying to be loved. But that inner angsty teen can be quite a thing. And at that point in time, I just didn't really know who I was. And then it's grade 12, and you're like, you have to pick a career. Just like how you were like, I went through with kinesiology, but didn't really. And I always knew that I had 2 paths. Like, for whatever reason, I knew I had 2 paths. And the one was to become a chef, and the other was helping people. But I was like, what is helping people? And I considered going to school to become like a grief therapist because I was experiencing a lot of grief. But I was like, I'm not. Like, you're how old when you like 17, 18 years old? So I went to school to become a chef. And that's what I ended up doing by trade for 10 years. And it was a super masculine industry, really long hours. I didn't have much of a life. I was underpaid. And it was in about 2018 that, so previous to that, it was 2014 that my mom was then diagnosed with cancer. It was less than a month after her mother passed away that she actually discovered the lump in her breast herself. And I had dreams of going away, whether that was like moving away to work or like going away for school. And then this happened, and kind of more fear. And I was like, okay, I can't leave. Like, I can't leave my mother. So I went to Niagara College, went to school, started working. And then in 2018 was when her treatment wasn't really working. They had gotten the cancer under remission. It had spread to her bones. They got it under control. 2018, meds weren't really working anymore. And I was like, okay, I can't do this forever. That's when I was really like, I was crying on my way to work every day. I was having panic attacks in the parking lot. I was getting physically ill. Like, at one point in time, I had a sinus infection that lasted 2 months. And when I finally brought myself to the doctor, she was like, what are you doing going to work? So that was when I started meditating, kind of similar to you. I was just like, I need to find some like peace of mind and some quiet and some relief. And I was just kind of grasping onto anything that I could. And 2 of the people who kind of like I started listening to was Esther Hicks channeling Abraham, and Teal Swan.
Cool.
And they started, of course, talking about how we create our own reality and we create our own suffering. Abraham Hicks talks a lot about like the law of attraction and manifestation, and Teal Swan was talking a lot about separation and the idea of us perceiving ourselves as being separate from everything in this world being the root cause of our suffering. And how we project our stories onto other people. and we built up these walls to protect ourselves from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I was so afraid of being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time too, not unlike you, I was really bad at having relationships with women.
Yeah. Yep.
Like working in the restaurants, if they hired, because I was most frequently like one of the only females that was working there. And if there was another female that they were assigning me to train, they would have to tell me to play nice.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. Yeah. I was like, what? You?
I know. So my relationships with females were really wounded, and all of this messaging from Teal Swan was kind of waking me up to the idea that like, oh, it's not them, it's me. And how I kind of started to work with this was actually through doing my Reiki training.
Right.
So I actually did my Reiki level 1, 2, and 3 with my mother, which was really beautiful. But it was all women. And so this was kind of my first experience, like being in this group with all women where I didn't know any better than them.
Yeah. That's really cool. And that's a really neat similarity between our stories because, yeah, mine was also 2018 after my brother passed away that I was like, I need some women in my life. Like, I don't like, yeah. And then it was through the spiritual healing groups and the classes, the women's circles that I was going to, that I also had my first experience of like healing in a group with other women. So I think that's really cool that we both have that experience.
Yeah. And I remember watching the woman who was teaching us, and I was like, wow, like she's like living at home and like working at home and making these nutritious lunches and like making money doing something she loves.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of this like light bulb moment. Meanwhile, there was like drama that was happening back at work. Like I was essentially kind of getting scolded for like taking this day off. And that was like the pressure building to like get me out.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I need to move more into my feminine.
Shows the contrast of those two worlds.
Yeah.
Like the masculine dominated world and just the feminine, and just that there can be all these worlds exist at the same time.
Yeah.
But what world are we like living in, you know?
And just like we said, like you don't know any differently until you experience anything differently.
Yeah.
And joining this class was like my first experience of
seeing something different and like, oh, there could be a different way.
Yeah. And so the first step for me was I left the job that I was working that had these crazy hours, and I found myself a job still within the kitchen, but I was working like 7 to 3 or 7 to 4. And I remember talking to my friends and I was like, oh my God, like, did you see the sunsets? Like, there's so many butterflies. And they're like, Laurie, like, what are you smoking?
Yeah.
And I just hadn't been around to see a sunset or to see life.
Yeah.
But the fact that I had evenings off allowed me the opportunity to join a meditation mediumship group. So I think it was 2 nights a week that we were meeting and we were practicing getting messages for each other. And once I started getting my first messages that were like accurate for people, I was hooked.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a drug.
Yeah.
It's like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And I had done it before, but I didn't know that you could, not to say control it, but that it was something that you could actually like tap into consistently versus just like kind of being a coincidence.
Yeah.
And so once I realized that like, oh, you can actually like do this, I just carried down that path. But I was stubborn and not letting go of the restaurant industry because I had all these scarcity stories.
We do that.
And at this time, kind of similar to you, I had just been named top 30 under 30 for like Ontario hospitality industry.
Cool.
And I was only 24 years old. So at 24 years old, I was on this list that I had literally, I could still remember sitting in my college class And this
Dreaming
one
it
guy
up.
came to present, and he had been top 30 under 30, and I was like, I want to make that list.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had just reached what I thought was the pinnacle of my career.
Yeah.
Like these mountains that we're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
like get to the top of, and it meant nothing to me.
Yeah.
Like it meant absolutely nothing to me.
Yep.
And so it was shortly after that that COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what COVID kind of represented from like a global perspective was the shift into a more feminine energy.
Cool.
Where we're not working as much.
I just got shivers.
Yeah. And so I started offering readings over Zoom, and people loved it. And I was like, oh, it like, because I had this limiting belief that like people didn't really want these services.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, that's not true.
Limiting beliefs are crazy.
None of these stories that I'm telling myself are true.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just kind of kept snowballing from there. But similar to you then, like losing your brother in 2021, June of 2021 was when my mother passed away. And it kind of shook my world up a little bit for me because I wasn't sure if I could. You always have to be walking the talk.
Yeah.
And I was like, can I walk the talk?
Yeah.
Like, can I actually believe and embody and trust all the things that I'm telling other people and teaching other people now that it's happened to me?
Right.
And it was an ultimate moment of surrender where I tried to walk away. And it was literally like every like fiber of my being could not imagine not doing this work. And I actually called my ex because, you know, like we stayed friends. So yeah, 2020 during COVID, changed careers, left my relationship, went through a move, and then my mother, like all this stuff happened all at once. But we remained friends, and I called him, and he said the same thing that he always said to me that always used to piss me off. But at this particular moment of time, I was like ready to hear it. And he was like, can you become comfortable with being uncomfortable?
Oh. Yeah.
And I started thinking about all the people that I don't want to say like looked up to, but looked up to. And I'm like, yeah, right? Like all these people are doing it and trusting it. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but I do believe that I can get used to this journey because as you know, like there is no end.
No.
There is no goal. Like we're never reaching anything.
Yeah.
And if you think that you've like made it or you've healed, you got to start right back over again. And so that was a moment where I like just kind of ultimately surrendered, and I was like, yes, because I trust in God and I trust in the path, and whatever happens is going to happen. And I can literally like point it back to that moment where my life like truly opened up for me. But like we talked about, it's like it's not maybe going to come to you in the way that you think it is. So it was 2 weeks after my mom passed away. I was like given this ultimatum if I want to do this work anymore, decided that I did, that I was given an eviction notice.
Right. From your house. Yeah.
From my house. And I was told that I was going to move cities. And just as I was wanting to fight it, I was like, no, I have to surrender. I have to trust that like God wants me on, like God wants me to be happy. And so yeah, I ended up moving to the north end of St. Catharines. It was also divinely guided. And I moved in with Amy, who's a yoga teacher. And it was she's the one that I ran my first retreat with. And like Amy and her family became my family when I felt like I didn't have a family anymore. And it was just like such a beautiful place for me to heal and grow and start my business. And Amy and one of her friends, Natalie, were in my first mediumship course. You know this story. And Natalie was teaching yoga for you, and one day you didn't have a caterer, and she knew that I used to be a chef and was like, hey, would you like cater this retreat?
Yeah.
And that's how we met. And I ended up like living a kilometer away from my, in 2 weeks, like in 5 weeks from now, husband.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, it was like within a year, like less than a year of that move, that my business had exploded. I was no longer working any other jobs to subsidize my income.
Mm-hmm.
I was planning on moving in with my partner, with Nick. We were collaborating on our first retreats together.
Yeah.
And now here we are starting this podcast and like getting ready to go back to Portugal for a second time this year.
And I think it's like, I think it's so important to remember, or even to draw out of both of our stories, is that stepping onto a path that was more aligned with our souls was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, it did not come without struggle. And I think that's something that you and I both want to be like pretty consistent in our messaging with people, is like, we're still doing this work.
Yeah.
It was not just like this overnight success story. It was not without struggle. Like, we have to be real here.
Yeah, because we can both say that we noticed like our businesses expand, but you also, like, when we say that, I want to make sure that we're also saying like it took daily hard work and being like uncomfortable every day, you know, in these periods of like continuously choosing, yes, we're going on this path, we're trusting, we're practicing trusting, you know, we're seeing where this is going to bring us. Yeah.
It's funny for me though, because I've always been somebody who like figures it out later.
Yeah.
Like so when opportunities present themselves to me, I've always been able to kind of be like, well, if it's here, I must be ready for it. But I've never felt ready. Like, that's the thing, is it's like,
same.
I'm good at just taking it. Like, I'm good at like looking at the opportunity and just saying yes and doing it, but I've never felt ready.
Yeah.
I've
been the same.
My first like event that I did was, it was a girl who was doing my eyebrows at the time, and she lived in Burlington, and she was like, I'm having this like sip and shop like vendor fair at my house. Would you want to come and like do readings or Reiki there? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was charging, I think I was charging like $20 for a 15-minute reading. And I didn't think that anybody was going to come for a reading. I was like, who's actually going to wait? And there was a lineup of like 10 people.
Oh my God, so fun.
Yeah. So in like whatever amount of time that is, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, I did 10 readings until like the next time I looked up, it was like pitch black outside and like everybody was like going home. And it was so wild for me to be like, somebody who's even the third person in line is willing to wait 45 minutes for this.
So cool. And maybe give us a little bit of a background on, because you mentioned the word God, so maybe give us a little bit of a background on what you mean by the word God, and also like what you channel, or like how you channel, just some information on that.
Because I had to do a lot of work to remove the term God from like Reformed patriarchal religion. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I still am working to like alleviate the kind of guilt and shame that came from being raised that way. But when I say God, I'm just referring to the soul, the consciousness that created all of us. Right? So we are God. All of our guides are God. Like, we are all part of God consciousness. And so, when I refer to God, it's not synonymous with religion, whether you believe in the universe, higher power, creator. All of those terms are interchangeable. I just feel fairly passionate about removing God from the kind of loaded term that we have all put to it. And the messages that come through for me, like I do communicate with passed away loved ones. I do communicate with like archangels and guides come in as well. But the majority of the time, you know, we kind of simplify things in saying that it's all coming from God consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And these messages are very much pertaining to your soul path and your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I know so many of us like believe that we are a soul or we have a soul, but we don't really know why we're here. And this is going to be a whole episode. But we're here to grow, and growth comes from learning lessons, and lessons present themselves as challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And these challenges, we feel like they're like blocks or like we're stuck in our life. So a lot of the guidance that I'm channeling is about what you've gone through, what you're going through, steps of clarity, and how to move through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I know you've been like surprised to find out, because it's like it's always loving and it's always for your highest good, but also like we will kind of like call you out and hold you accountable as well, because I know
yes.
before you're like, oh, like it's good to know that like if I were doing something wrong, I would know about it.
Yes. So it's not always like packaged up completely pretty. Yeah, sometimes, which is good. Your messages really get to, I mean, the heart of your work is getting to the root of why things we're struggling with in the now, the root of those things. And sometimes, I mean, it makes sense that if we've kind of been suppressing things, or we've kind of been using coping mechanisms in our life that aren't super helpful, the whole purpose of seeking support and guidance, you would want someone to like point these things out, right? If there's something that we're doing that's really like keeping us stuck or is coming from a deeper place, as difficult as it is to hear sometimes.
I mean, I've like called one of my clients up before. I'm like, we're like, you're having a temper tantrum,
right?
And like it's okay. And then because you know everything's always kind of like coming through me, and so then at the end of the call I kind of like step back and I'm Laurie and I'm like, I'm sorry. Right. And it amazes me sometimes how people will come to me to like hear the truth and the hard truth. And that a lot of times the feedback is like, but I didn't get this from counseling, or I didn't get this from conventional therapy, and it just kept me stuck in my stories. Right? Like you said with your first counselor, it's like, okay, I talked about all this stuff.
Where are we going with
now
it?
What?
Where's it coming from?
And it's like,
where is it?
If that's the kind of help that's being provided to somebody, like that's just what a friend should be doing for you. Like, why are we paying people to be our friends, just listening to our problems and not actually giving us any active advice?
Yeah, I think effective counseling definitely goes deeper to the root. It's deeper than talk therapy. It's
And of course, I think that it's not to talk down on anything, because we all need our stepping stones. It's just, I think we all kind of have to have that seed planted in our head that like, okay, some things help you to a point. And if there's a point where it's no longer like helping you or serving you, seek out the next thing.
And I think different, like at different points in your life or different challenges you're having, different modalities will be effective at different times.
For sure. There's a place for meditation, and then there's also a place for just like some good old like screaming and like and like releasing the energy. Right?
Absolutely.
Or like or breath work is like a beautiful tool to move things out of your body.
Awesome.
All right, well, I think that's going to be it until our next episode.
So that is episode 1. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are so excited to dive into all the topics that we want to discuss. And we will see you in episode 2.
See you next week on the Naked Soul Podcast.
Bye.